may be seated, lovely people. How are you all today? Fantastic. Well, the first service were out of control, super responsive, laughed at everything I said, even the things that weren't that funny. So they lifted the bar very high for you guys. In the first service, I did a brand new message. I'm not doing that here, but it will be available online for you for a while. So the people online this morning are ahead of the church here. It's already out there in the online world. So that's online. That's the world we're living in. People online are ahead of the people in the room often. Deal with it, I say. It's the way of the future. It is a joy to be here. And I had people too that I brought back to my church every year. Like I've been here with you for 5 now, because they were like family to us. And I felt whenever they were amongst us, it was always about us and not them. They kind of had a way of communicating and being amongst us that made me feel that we mattered to them as if we were their own church or their own kids. And those people are rare. And I think because I come from decades of doing what John and Chantel are doing, I don't have to struggle to be in their shoes. I did it for decades, and so I know what a challenge it is. I know intrinsically, in forensic detail, what it means to build a church. So I'm not trying to connect or identify. It's been my DNA for years, and I still think the local church is the best idea that God ever had. However, 98% of our country don't agree with that because they're not in church. So that's why you really matter more than you think perhaps sometimes you do. I was saying in the first service, and I want to say to you guys again, this is so rare in this country. It is rare because 98% are in church, but it is rare amongst the 2% that are in church. This caliber and quality of church that you're building, you're moving towards a whole new venue. I think venue changes are interesting. I had several and built several buildings in my time as a pastor, and buildings are interesting and the effect they have on people. Some people left our church when we got to the 2,000-seater because it was too big now. It's not sort of personable anymore. When we took the women's conference to the arena, many women stopped coming because it was too big now. It's that you've got to keep an eye out for, all of you. That when you move to that new building, you can't have any good old days about this building. You can't move somewhere physically and stay somewhere mentally, emotionally that you left years ago. So you try to take this version of you, whatever this building's done to make you comfortable and at home and special, whatever lovely things happen to you here. I got saved in that building. I got filled with the Spirit in that building. My life was changed one Sunday in 1995 in that building. And we make attachments to buildings that really become nostalgia. And when we move on, because progress demands that, we struggle and don't know what it is we're struggling about. So keep an eye on that. Keep loose with this building. Don't form attachments to it. It's great. We thank God for it. But it is not your long-standing home. The next one you'll be in longer. But that may not be your permanent building either. So just enjoy every season. And remember, you're upgrading you. Don't get an upgrade to first class, which the next building will be, and keep an economy mindset. My family did that once. We got upgraded to first class British Airways to America, me and my wife and kids when the kids were younger. I thought it was awesome until I caught the kids trying to pass around their spare bread rolls and the bits of muffin they didn't want, because in economy, that's what we do. We share, we look after each other. But no one needs your spare anything in first class. So my kids had this economy behavior in a first class environment, and everybody looks at it like, who are these people? Clearly they've been upgraded. Clearly they don't belong here. They didn't pay their way here, was the feel in the first class cabin. And to enforce the point, a lady in first class threw up in the bathroom in first class. They washed the whole bathroom down with champagne. Hello, that's how much freaking champagne they got up front. You'll never see it back there, but up front, my point is, they don't need your spare Coke. So you can go to a new building and still be passing your bread rolls round like you maybe do here, or you did prior to this in another church or wherever. You got to move up with the building. The building will be a game changer. Like when a team goes to Premier League, you got to change a lot of things Because getting there and staying there are two different things. All good. All right. Let me mention a couple of resources because I know you people are personal development gurus. And I want you to go with some options at least beyond what I can say to you today. Live Full, Die Empty, this USB series is something I felt very important to speak about at home and to you guys, because I think in churches we have got full, stayed full, protected our fullness and not given it away pro rata. And the idea with life, but certainly the Christian life, is to learn and grow, but keep getting empty. You want to get into heaven with nothing else to say to anybody on earth. No one else to reach, no one else to lay a hand on, no one else to wish you'd included, because nobody needs any of that stuff in heaven. So you've got to spend all that voucher here. You can't spend that voucher in heaven if you didn't use it here. It's only, that voucher is only spent in the shop called earth. So Live Full, Die Empty, I think, became a huge part of what helped us to reach people in our city with this urgency to empty out what we were learning every Sunday together and so on. And then finally this video series I did called Gold Standard. There's 3 of these of my top 10s. This particular video top 10 series is called Personal Development, because I want you to keep flourishing as people. And I know flourishing as a person is not an accident. It has to be on purpose. And so these are my top 10 on things I've figured out in recent years about how to keep growing as a person. Number 1, personal development top tip. I'll give you it free, though it's worth a $5. Is if you want to keep developing as a person and flourishing, you have to let go of being liked. And some of you are stuck for that reason only. You're waiting for someone's permission, someone's validation, someone's approval, because you know what happens next is going to move you away from their orbit, is going to perhaps move you away from that WhatsApp channel. It's going to put you in a different sphere, and you're afraid that the people that have only known the other version of you are not going to be happy because they're not. Stop waiting for someone's high five. It's never going to come, and keep moving. If you keep waiting for endorsement, you won't grow, and you'll stay on levels longer than you should. So let go of your addiction to being liked, some of you. It's okay. Not being liked will not kill you. Waiting to be liked will. All right. Well, I'm going to share with you an idea that I wanted to say 2 things to you today, because tonight we're going to do an interview, the bishop and I. So I wanted to talk about 2 things today. So I have 2 options, 2 ways to do it. The first one I spoke earlier, a new message called the shibboleths that divide us. I know, what the heck's that about, you thinking? I was thinking the same when I put it together, thinking you'll be all thinking that. But shibboleth is a Bible word. It's all Bible stuff. You'll be okay. And I think you'll enjoy that for the time you can view it. But I want to talk about something else before I leave Norwich today in my annual visit. And the title of this message is called Who's Pushing Them In? Who's pushing them in? That little graphic there will help you visual learners a little bit more than your audio learners to have an image. Photograph the screen if you want to keep that image on your phone for a little bit. This Who's Pushing Them In, I've lifted out as one line from a longer quote that I want to read to you. This quote was from Archbishop Desmond Tutu in 1948 at the beginning of apartheid in South Africa. And he said, you can only rescue so many drowning people from the river before you have to go upstream to see who's pushing them in. Clearly what he meant was that, and as a church leader, as one of us, in apartheid South Africa, seeing all the people that were drowning, all the people that were victims of the system, and the manifestation of that would have been, as we know, because it's still happening all around the world today, including South Africa, crime, violence, drug addiction, poverty, lack, disease, sickness, all of these things that were people's lives in an apartheid South Africa. These were why people were drowning. People were drowning through addiction and through violence and through oppression, while the white people were flourishing, the blacks were struggling. And I think Desmond Tutu looked at it and realized this will get worse before better. And I think he realized that if we as a church think our job is to become a lifeboat rescue station, I think there's going to be so many people in the water that we're going to miss more than we can save. So I think he decided, I think he thought, what we have to do as leaders generally, not just church leaders, but especially as church leaders, I think he was saying, we have to go upstream and find out why are so many people in the water. Because eventually, you got to think to yourself, and I did this, of course, in leading the church for decades in Bradford, in a church where thousands and thousands were drowning, many of whom we were not reaching until the late 90s, is that there are so many people sometimes in the water, you have to be suspicious about how come so many people are drowning. The problem isn't each individual person's story that they think they're drowning because of decisions they've made, wrong choices they've made, but you've got to think there are so many people drowning. This is such a big problem. Someone has to eventually ask the question, why are so many people drowning? And the only way to answer that is to step back from the immediacy of having a rescue mentality, which is what the church has had for too long. What a rescue mentality, and rescue matters. Rescue is important. We would all feel to some degree, and some of us very much so, that we were rescued by God from a life that was best described as drowning. And I understand that. I think we'll always be involved. The church, not just the church, many other organizations will always be involved in rescuing drowning people. So I'm not against rescue. Neither was Desmond Tutu. But what I'm saying to you is, we have to come to a point, otherwise it's exhausting. To keep rescuing drowning people is simply exhausting. And so you have to have a new idea eventually, which I got about 17 years or so into my leadership in Bradford. I began to realize something, I didn't have the language for it back then that I do now, but I think we were building a church that majored on only rescuing people. And we never stopped to ask ourselves, hang on a minute, would this be better long term? Would we have more longevity? Would we have more long-term success and impact if we started to ask questions about what, who, how are people ending up in the water in the first place? Because apartheid as a system, as you know, apartheid was constantly pushing these people in. They weren't drowning because they decided to be drug addicts. They're not drowning through crime. They're turning to drugs and turning to crime because the system gives them no other option. So there's something wrong systemically. There's something wrong in the DNA of the government and the organizational political structure that's pushing them in. I was recently studying crime statistics in Japan. Don't ask. But I was. And I was fascinated because in Japan, they have a massive disproportionate percentage of elderly people in jail. A lot of people in jail in Japan is 20%, by the way. In most countries around the world, it's about 3% of people over 70 in jail. Japan has 20%. And when I researched it, the reason so many people are in jail in their late life and in their dying days in Japan is because in Japan, there's no welfare system. And many of the elderly are living like homeless people. They have no money, there's no welfare system, there's no wealth in the family to help them, and they're living rough, and they're really dying because they don't have anywhere to keep warm, they don't have anywhere to get food, they have no money. And in Japan, they figured out. In Japan, you get long prison sentences for petty crimes. So the elderly are committing petty crimes to deliberately be sent to jail. Because life in jail is better than life on the streets. So they are being pushed into jail by a system in that country that is not taking care of the elderly in that country. So Japan doesn't have an elderly crime problem. And so jail becomes the rescue of the drowning. but they're in jail because the system is pushing them in. So I saw a man on camera interviewed in jail. He's 85, on his third jail sentence since he started committing crime at 70. His first crime was to steal some sellotape from a shop. It was a you know, a 2-pound crime. He got 6 months in jail for it. It cost the Japanese government £100,000 for a 3-pound crime. That's how stupid it is. His friends in jail said to him, you need to do something worse to come back here, to get to stay here longer. Shall I go to handheld? Is that, somebody got an option for me? You're going to turn this off, guys, then this is disengaged. Thank you. So he went out and he stole a bicycle, for which he got 15 months in jail. He was so happy. Then his friend said to him, no, you've got to do something worse. Get a knife and threaten someone. That's what he did. He got out of jail, bought a knife, threatened a lady in the park, no intention of hurting her at all, just stood there waiting for the cops to come. For which he got 7 years in jail. He was so happy. So I tell you that to make you go, whoa, that's ridiculous. And then I want you to take that thought and think, but where is that happening in my life? Or in my neighborhood? Or in this country? Because all around the world, there are things that are pushing people in to options they don't want to choose, and it's not of their own choosing. And this is what happens. So many people often are drowning that it becomes a generational default mode behavior like it did in South Africa. So what happens is so many people are drowning that the people now rescuing are also people that used to be drowning. So those that were rescued become the rescuers, and because the rescuers didn't know why they were in the water, they don't ask the question about why you're in the water. So for generations, no one bothers to ask the question of why are we all in the water? Then the church comes along and the church gets involved, and we start having a gospel that focuses primarily on rescue of the lost. And we start gearing up in our conversation, our language, our ideology, our theology, our events, our budgeting, the way we structure the church, our organizational things that we do, and we start rescuing people. And I think what Tutu's saying, and what I want you to think about, Soul Church, for your future, you'll always be involved in rescue. I've said that, okay? So you know where I'm coming from. But I want you to think, who is pushing these people in? And is there a way to build church that is intelligent and that is informed about things that are making people in our community do things they shouldn't and don't want to do? And are we better to spend our time and energy and leadership and wisdom and our voice speaking to the people that are pushing them in, whether it be government or the justice system or the welfare system or the medical system? Are we better to address our comments whilst rescuing? We're not going to stop rescuing. We'll rescue, but we're going to also do something else. And I began to build our church differently from the late 90s onwards around this idea, because I realized so many people reaching were coming with all kinds of generationally established problems. We were busting in third, fourth generation drug addicts, third, fourth generation prostitute families, child poverty families, families that had long-standing unemployment, never worked. No one in their family had worked for 4 generations. Nobody ever had a job. And what this does is it builds something into the DNA of these families, that if they come to our churches and we lead them to believe from the day one, we're here to rescue you, what they now is they see now us as a new codependent relationship. Now we become the equivalent of the welfare state. It's just the church are giving our version of it. Now they form a new dependency to attend to their drowning on a church's version of rescuing it. And I realized that this would kill us. We would never have any success with these people. They would wear us out, because the same people were coming for rescue every week. And we're repeatedly rescuing the same drowning people, because we were not giving them skills for life and wisdom for life that would help them figure out, hang on, the reason I keep drowning is because I am not taking on board any new information that's making me understand there's a cause and effect issue in my life. So we finish up treating effects and effects and effects, instead of going upstream to figure out What are the possible causes of these effects? And I'm advocating that we move as churches from our obsession with cure to prevention. That we move from slashing away at foliage and fruit to figuring out what are the roots of this. To move from what to why is this happening. I didn't want to continue to build a church, that I think this is true again still around the world, that we are majoring on encounter. You need an encounter with God. This encounter with God thing, I understand it. I believe it. But I think what we're in danger of, and the emerging generation, the millennials in here, and the teenagers coming up behind the millennials, called the iGen. I stands for internet. These emerging generations are wired different to we baby boomers. The emerging generation are smart. They are thinkers because they have the internet and they are exposed to thousands of voices saying the same thing that you're saying. And the emerging generation are being sociologically educated to think much more about top down rather than just from the drowning on. They're thinking about governments and systems, and they're taking to the streets, they're protesting. That's what happened in 2011 with the Arab Spring. When millions of millennials went to the streets to try and topple the dictatorships of Colonel Gaddafi, or the equivalent in Egypt, or Tunisia, or Yemen, or Syria, where it's still going on now. The back end of that whole thing in Syria started in 2011, called the Arab Spring, when young people said, we cannot change this through democracy. This dictatorship is pushing us and our kids and kids' kids into oppression. And we can never change it because they're getting ready to hand it over to the son. And it stays in the family line, these dictatorships. So the kids thought, okay, we have social media, thank God, we'll send it viral. We don't need CNN or BBC. We'll start our own viral awareness that we are going to shed blood, and they did by their thousands, to try and stop this dictatorship pushing them, but more importantly, the generations to come. They're concerned, these millennials are much more generationally minded than some generations before them were. They want to do something that's lasting. They are legacy minded earlier than many of our generation were. And they want to do something, to break a pattern in their lifetime, because they're aware, my language is, that so many are drowning, including them, and they're obsessed and concerned with how do we figure out what's pushing us in. They figured out what's pushing us in is the dictatorship, and they figured out we can't change it democratically, so we'll have to go to the streets and protest and risk our lives. And thousands of them died, were killed, shot on the streets, imprisoned and so on, because they tried to go upstream. So I'm not pretending going upstream is easy. It is way easier to rescue. It has much more a sense of immediate reward to pull someone out of the water. It's much more gratifying to rescue a drowning person than to sit in a meeting with a politician and try to have a go at changing the conversation, at rethinking what's going on, at saying, you know, I think if the government would change this or that policy, because what's happening around the world is many of the people that are rescuing are hand in glove with the people pushing them in. So governments are pushing us in by all kinds of stupid policies that serve them and not us. And the pharmaceutical companies that are keeping us all medicated don't want me to talk to you about going upstream in your own life to find out what's making you need that medicine. They don't want us to talk to you about personal development. They don't want me to talk to you about aging well, another resource I have here today that's brand new. Did I mention aging well? I forgot to mention that. Oh, you should all get that before you go home. It's a new resource. It's 60 videos, 11 hours to camera. It's a digital product about aging well. As you can see, I am. I'm 95, people. And I wanted to speak to you guys and to all the world about aging well. And you will not age well if you build your life on rescuing yourself instead of asking yourself, what is it in me, in the way I think, in my belief systems, my ideology, in things I should have let go of a long time ago, in people I should have let go of a long time ago. What is it in me that's pushing me in? Recent research shows, and it's fascinating and not surprising to me because I found this when I was pastoring, that many people, and especially women who struggle with obesity, that they're medicated, as are people with depression, medicated, because we've treated these things as chemical and as physical. So we think depression is because you lack serotonin. So we give you Prozac that replaces serotonin and gives you a dopamine boost to balance you out, kind of thing. But research is showing that depression certainly has some chemical factor, but far less than we ever thought. Depression is much more environmental and relational. Depression is much more because people are lonely. And we have the erosion of human connection all around the world. And people have no meaningful work. And if you have no connection and no work that you love, then what happens is you start to feel hopeless. And then you go on social media and it enforces your sense of isolation. And suicide statistics have spiked in our country, and the government has appointed, as you know, a minister of suicide. We're the only country in the world that has a minister of suicide in the cabinet in our country, because the government realized suicide stats are so off the charts, and that's only the stats connected to the ones that succeeded killing themselves. There's no stats for the ones that tried and didn't succeed because they didn't finish up in hospital, so they didn't come on the database. But there's probably a whole below the radar iceberg lot that did try or think about it, will try again. And suicide has gone crazy since the arrival of social media, because it reinforces your drowning, reinforces your addiction, your problem. And so they found out with many people that are struggling with obesity, that many women that are struggling with obesity, a large percentage, 40% in a recent survey interviewed, was sexually abused in their childhood. And obesity has become a way for them to disappear from sexual attention. To be overweight and obese means that they're probably not going to attract any male attention. And so the obesity is not the problem. The problem that's pushing them in was the sexual abuse. And because that's never been talked about, and never been fixed, and never been sorted out, we continue to medicate these people, or give them bypass operations or tummy clamps, or whatever we do is costing the NHS billions to keep rescuing us. So the world's changing. I want you all to know, and the church has to get this memo, the world's changing. We're all realizing that there's too much plastic in the ocean for us to keep fishing it out. We've got to go upstream and find out what is the problem, and we've got to speak to corporates. And so you've got to stop manufacturing plastic products, and we've got to say to all of us, we've got to give up our plastic. And these moves around the world to do with all things like that are telling us that the world is changing, and the world is moving much more, global warming and so on, to these things that are pushing us in. And so we're no longer wanting to respond to the appeal that has a rescue tone to it. And we're fed up of giving our money to things that don't change anything. And this is where the church comes in, because to me the Bible is filled with both rescue, but what we've missed is it's filled with upstream wisdom for life. The Bible's full of it. Proverbs is full of it. Jesus told 3 back-to-back stories, didn't he, of lostness in Luke 15. First time we ever have heard the word lost attached to a human. Jesus invented that term about people. And he tells the story of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son, didn't he? Now what we've taken from that as preachers and as churches is that's our evangelistic passages. It's what we use to preach about the lost, and it's what we use to speak to people, to convince, to convict, to persuade them to come to Christ, because they're lost and they're alone and they're like the sheep was, or the coin, or the son. And certainly that's okay. But I want you to reread those scriptures in light of what I'm saying to you today this way. What Jesus is also saying is that there's a reason each of those were lost. There's a reason the sheep was lost, and the coin was lost, and the son was lost. And not just looking at it as, thank God they got rescued. If you look at it with what pushed them in, Now think of a sheep as a person, because it's a metaphor for a person. So is a coin. They're metaphors for people. Think of the sheep. The sheep, and I just know this from watching sheep when I ride my motorcycle in the Yorkshire Dales and talking to farmers. You ever ride out somewhere in the countryside, especially this time of year with all the sheep and the lambs and so on, and you see a group of sheep grazing, then there's one way off on its own somewhere, grazing, not with the pack. And what happens is that night comes and the weather changes, and that sheep that's away from the pack doesn't know where it is. It's disoriented. So it walks over a cliff, or it freezes to death, or it's taken by a predator, depending what country we're in, and the sheep's gone. It's lost. But the sheep got lost, not because it woke up that morning deciding, I'm going to get lost today, and I'm going to be vulnerable, and I'm going to risk losing my life. I'll tell you how the sheep got lost. Same way people got lost. It got lost through preoccupation. It munched itself lost. So do most people. Please don't ever think, and don't have a theology that says this: unsafe people, lost people, know they're lost. They're running away from God. They hate God, and they're very aware of their eternity, and they're afraid of dying. It is not true. They don't give God a second thought. They couldn't care less about eternity. They are too busy enjoying sinning. And if you got saved and forgot to sin enough, it's too late now. So I think Jesus is saying sheep are like people. People are just trying to survive and pay the bills and raise the kids and stay healthy and keep their job. They're preoccupied, never more than now in the Western world. It's so driven. I was in traffic the other morning going somewhere, and I'm like, geez. And some of you do it every day. These commutes, you spend hours in traffic. I don't know how people do it. And so we're in this rat race. We're on this treadmill. And people are not, doing it because they're trying to run from God. They're just being a sheep. So sheep get lost because they're preoccupied, as were many of us, and still are, with life. The coin got lost because of someone else's neglect. The woman that owned the coin was not careful with the coins, and she lost one. So the coin represents people who are not lost at all through their own fault. They're not drowning at all through their own fault. They're drowning because someone else neglected to take care of them. That can begin in childhood. It can begin in nurture. And some people are not raised well, and some people, as I said, are abused in their childhood, and some people are pushed in the early years, and they're lost through someone else's neglect. And I think the coin says to us, there's a reason the coin was lost, and it's someone else that didn't take care of someone and made them vulnerable and made them in a place called lost. But it wasn't their job to stay found. It was the owner's job to stay, to make sure it stayed in a safe place. And the son's lost through miscalculation. He said, I'm going to take my inheritance, I'm going to have a ball. And then it all went wrong. He finished up winning the lottery, went partying, got into trouble, finished up on drugs, made a lot of bad choices, got physically sick. He finished up in a pig pen. He's the lowest of the low. Then it occurred to him, I'm going to try and go back home. I'm going to go humble. I don't expect anything. I'm going to go and volunteer to just be a worker in the fields. I'm going to be a staff member in the house. I don't care about a salary. He has that conversation with himself. And so when he went home, the father's waiting for him, because the father knows that the son pushed himself in. That this boy had to figure out what it was like to drown because he made a decision. And many of us, and some of you here that are worried about people that are not here, your children, family and friends that you can see are making miscalculations in their life, and those wrong choices are putting them into a pig pen. This was some of you too. And so you lost like the son was, but he was lost because upstream he made some bad choices. Now, if what I'm saying to you is at all reasonable, then we should look at lost people different from now on. We should not look at them as rebels and resistant and God haters, and we approach them like this. We should see them as just like you. People are lost for all kinds of reasons that push them in. They're not even conscious they're being pushed in. They know they're drowning. They know they're in trouble, but they're not sure how that happened. And I'm asking you, and I realize with the hundreds of people we were busing in, there are all kinds of really entrenched generational problematic lifestyles. I realized our gift to them would not be this, and not even counseling. I banned counseling. I said, let's not counsel these people. They will kill us. They will shut us down in a heartbeat. One family, one of these families is so messed up, we don't have the hours available to counsel them, let alone understand their world, because we're all white middle class people, don't have a clue where they've come from. So there was a massive disconnect in terms of life experience anyway. And I said, let's just put them into an environment of love and acceptance and inclusion and second chances and believing in them and championing their potential and opportunity and empowerment. Let's see whether this culture that's very thought through. I was very forensic with cultural engineering in my church because I could. I can't do that now on one-offs around the world, but I could then. Let's build a culture where even the sickest person would do well just with the culture. That the culture itself becomes medication. The culture becomes prevention. The culture becomes healing and recovery without anybody reaching out to rescue them on a one-on-one kind of thing. And I think we underestimate the power of an intentionally thought through culture. And we think therefore we have to talk more than we do. So we talk too much because we feel we have no backup from the culture. And when people use too many words often, it's because the words are all they've got. But the culture has words, the culture has a voice, the culture has a spirit and a heart and a love. And so I just stepped back and watched these people flourish. Not all of them, but many of them flourished with none of the traditional rescuing that we thought we should oblige to hand them. They recovered and got stronger because I spent 12 years, week in, week out, speaking to people about things that are pushing them in. And I would give them ideas and I would say, I think this is why some of you do this. I think this is why some of you default to that behavior. And here's another idea for your life. And eventually people began to realize, yeah, I didn't know there were other options because people don't. No one told me there was another way to do that, another way to see that, another way to frame that. No one told me that this is my own fault in a kind way, not in this way. And it's not your fault if you are thinking in a way you don't know you're thinking. If you have beliefs you've had in your family for generations about people of a different color, or about gender, or about authority, or about church, or about God, or about government, or about whatever, if you have these biases you don't know you have, and these belief systems we all have and don't know what they are, constantly make us default to someone we don't want to be. And this is why, and I was saying this yesterday at the Growing Big People event, this is why we don't understand. We can go to the gym in January, but we quit by March, latest, because we have a good intention to want to change like we all do here today, not knowing that a nodding head and a shouting amen means nothing. And it's not that it comes from an insincere heart and mind to shout amen because we want to change, but we don't know that while we're shouting amen internally, we are believing ourselves away from what we're shouting amen to. Y'all okay? They'd be like, what? Is any Jesus coming yet? Has he mentioned Jesus yet? I've got to tell you, I travel more than I've ever done in the church around the world. And because you're family to me, I don't want you to default to what's happening around the world in the church, which is what I talked about in the service earlier, the shibboleth thing, because that's happening around the world. It's killing us and dividing us. And then this, churches that are majoring on encounter instead of education. If we will educate, like you do with your kids, you say to your kids, don't you? Listen, if you don't do that, that won't happen. If you do more of that, that will happen. It's like a childlike conversation, but it's no different with adults. And I think in the church, we think we don't need to educate you because we'll just rescue you with an encounter. So you start to think the idea is, I'll just get a supernatural touch from God. And we can't get away with it anymore. These kids coming up are too smart and they don't want it. I talk to my grandkids and they say, Papa, what is that? What is that? When they see something or hear something, what is that? And I said, that's what it was like in my day. And this is why we did it, because we didn't know any better. And we were obsessed with rescue. And we believed that Jesus' job is intervention. End of. We don't think he's good for education or empowerment. So we major on power and we minor on empowerment. So you need a power touch rather than you need empowering so you don't need a touch. You need educating so you don't need an encounter, because education is an encounter. It's an encounter with your brains. And what I realize in the church around the world is that really, as a pastor, and I went through this as a pastor, and I recognized it, I had the self-awareness to identify it. As a pastor, I have to be careful that I don't keep building a rescue church because I need you to need me. A lot of pastors need to be needed. It's this man of God stuff. So I lead in a way that makes you feel somehow that you can't live without me. That you need my hand on your head, as if my hand on your head is better than your hand on your head, and it's not. As if my word to you is better than your word to you, and it's not. As if my counsel to you is better than your counsel to you, and it's not. Anything I give you as a leader should be supplementary, not primary. I should be building on top of what you're already doing yourself. I should be just giving you ideas on top of ideas. But if I come across like, this is why I say around the world, I'm not being unkind about this, I've got a word from God for you on Sunday. And I know what people mean. I used to say it too, till I realized it sounds a little bit over-promising. And I think I under-delivered. Because it's this hypey language. As if I think you need a word from God every Sunday. How many words of God do you need? Like you got more than Moses, most of us. So I stopped using that language and said, and started using terms like wisdom for life, or empowerment, or this is just an idea I think might help you guys, and started to dial it down in language so that we all could feel there's nothing special about me saying this. You could have probably read it in a book somewhere or Googled, you could Google what I'm saying to you now. You could Google something, I don't know what you put in as a search, and find a book or something. So I'm not up here like I was on the mountain with God and he told me something about pushing people in. That's why I'm finding Japanese crime statistics are just as useful to me as Moses, to make the point. But if we use Japanese crime statistics and not Moses, we kind of feel you'd all think cheated because you came to church. You only hear about Moses here, not Japan. But it's the way we've built our churches, I think. So I'm saying to leaders around the world, don't keep saying, I've got a word from God, because it suggests that something big's going to be said. And I mentor a lot of people around the world now. And I mentor high-flying business people and politicians and actors and people that are going to church, borderline. And they say to me, I don't grow in church because the pastor tells me I've got a word from God. And when I hear it, I got more out of the TED Talk yesterday. And it's not these people's fault. It's the way we're building our churches to make you think all the anointing, all the power is up here. All the wisdom's up here. All the strength's up here. All the answers are up here. All the love is up here. All the ideas and visions up here. Not there. So we create our own version of what we used to have years ago of, clergy laity, where you're all passive and we're up here doing all the work, and we finish it with a jumbo jet church. 300 passengers and 20 crew that are exhausted. And I knew that's what I was going to finish up with busing all these people in, because they were exhausting with their needs. So I'm suggesting an idea for you guys. I'm suggesting you ask about you. I think something's pushing us in. I think something's pushing me in. I want to figure out what it is. I want to find language for it. And I want to go upstream in my own life. And I want to cut something off. I don't want to live a life of needing to be rescued all the time. I don't want to be rescued in my relationship with my family, in my marriage. I'm sick and tired of having conversations that are the same thing, rescuing me every few months. Maybe something's pushing you in. Maybe something's pushing us in. Can we go upstream and find out who is pushing them in, and start addressing that. I got to tell you, this country, this part of the country, will thank you forever if you will focus on cause rather than keep building churches on effects and rescue of drowning people. Let's stand together. Come on, time's gone. Y'all okay? I know it's a bit intense, eh? I'm getting intense as I get older. Maybe I'm aware my time on the planet is running out. And so I look at my clock and I'm like, boom, I'm gone. And I'm working hard to cut out any waffle, repetition, and ahhing, saying it clumsily, because I've got a little bit of time with you. And I'm so at this stage of my life thinking, God, help me to say it well so that there's a connection. And sometimes my subjects mean the connection takes a good 15 minutes before we're on the same page, like Shibboleth. Close your eyes. Father, thank you for these beautiful people here today and this amazing church. Thank you for the journey so far, and we're so excited about the best that's still to come. Lord, we don't want a business as usual life or Christianity or church. We don't want to stumble into the next 5 years. We want this next 5 years to be absolutely forensic, intentional, strategic, thought through, deliberate. Lord, help us to uncouple from our own addictions to whatever versions of rescue we have got fallen into the trap of. I pray for wisdom and stature and communication and eloquence amongst us all to be able to have conversations that take people back to source, that take people back to hidden causes that they don't even know are perhaps there, that are producing behavior now that is hurtful to us. Give us a new empathy. Give us a new in their shoes awareness of what and who is pushing people in. And help us to become less judgmental and less rescue obsessed. And help us to become a voice that's progressive and educational and empowering. In Jesus' name. Let me ask quickly all across this room, if you're here today and maybe you've been several times or your first time here today, I don't know, but maybe you've never given your life to Christ like so many of us around you have. And we were once you as a visitor to a church, this or somewhere else. And someone in some form or other said to us what I'm saying to you now. Of, are you ready today? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. Maybe it's next week, maybe a couple of weeks' time. But I'm wondering if today you need me to say to you, do you need today to make a decision to start a new beginning with God? To give your life to Him in the way He gave His to yours 2,000 years ago. He loves you. He's not making His mind up about you. He's for you today. This is about you deciding what you'll do with that gift. If today you hear saying in your heart, you know, I want that today. I've heard this before, but I've never responded. And today I think it's my time. I want this year to be different to last year. And I don't think it will unless I break a pattern of coming so close to Jesus and then stepping away. So just take another step today, another little step, and make this final and make this a done deal. If you're giving your life to Christ today in that way I'm describing, all across the room, would you do something simple but powerful? Just lift your hand where you are. When I've seen your hand, you can take it down. Your hand's going to be saying that, God, I'm here today and I'm stepping up and I'm making this decision. And it's between me and God. It's not a group thing. It's between you and God. So forget anybody in the room, anybody not in the room whose voice is in your head. Forget that. Come on, anybody in this meeting here now, just lift your hand till I can see it. And that hand's going to be saying, I give you my life today. Come on, someone down here. Thank you. Come on, who else? Come on, someone else in the room. Anybody else? A few more seconds. A few more seconds. Anybody we're missing? Come on, someone back there. Come on, anyone else? Anyone else? 5 more seconds. Anybody? Somebody back there? Yeah. Somebody there. Thank you. All look at me. A couple of things, all right? Listen. It really matters for us to do this in our churches because we never want you to say, nobody waited for me. Because that's terrible when nobody did, because that kind of pushes you in. Oh, that church were too busy, they were too involved. involved in their own thing, didn't even notice me. Nobody said hello to me. I've been in lots of churches, by the way, recently. But I had people with me who didn't know they were with me. So they're in the crowd as a visitor. It's hard for me to blend in as a speaker. And said to me, nobody spoke to me. These are progressive churches. It's interesting, because we all think we're friendly because we are to each other. So if you're here today and you needed somebody to give you a moment, we just did that, and we'll gladly do it every single time. Because you'll never say nobody waited for me, and if they had, I would have made a different choice. And secondly, if lifting a hand doesn't suit you, please don't think lifting a hand means you can't come back, because you didn't. Lifting a hand is just a method. It's not sacred or special. It's not. It's just one quick way to move to a decision because of time. But we don't care how you come to Christ. If it's lifting a hand, great. If it's not, we don't care. We care that you find your way and that our methods don't put you off. So if you didn't lift a hand but wanted to talk to someone, have a question to ask, please follow through and do that, because it doesn't matter how you come to Christ. It matters that you find your way to do that. Love you guys. Back here tonight for an interview with the bishop. Be interesting where that goes. Have a great day. See you all later. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again for tuning in. If you said the salvation prayer today, we'd love for you to email connecttofaith@soulchurch.com so we can talk a little bit more about this incredible decision that you've just made. And if at any point in the service you felt moved to give to any of our local or global initiatives, then head to soulchurch.com and click on giving at the top of the page. We're so glad you tuned in today, and we hope to see you again soon. God bless.